My new book, The Art and Making of Fantasy Miniatures, is available now. Check out the link in the description to find out more. This is a review of Myth and Magic, The Art of John Howe. The book was originally published in 2001, but the one I've got here is a more recent reprint that was done to capitalize on the release of the Hobbit movies. But the only difference as far as I can tell is that on the cover it says designer for the Hobbit films and a slightly different blurb that references him working on the 2 Hobbit movies. Speaking about the blurb, it's almost entirely Lord of the Rings focused, and I mean everything about this book, from the cover images to having Peter Jackson's name on the cover as the writer of the foreword. It's all pushing the Lord of the Rings angle very, very hard. And that's fine in the sense that most of John Howe's professional career has been centered around Tolkien's work, but I do want to make sure you understand that the book also has a lot of fantastic non-Middle-earth works too, which I actually think I enjoyed more just because I wasn't as familiar with them. There's also a lot of cool previously unpublished works too, which is always a great incentive to buy an art book. Now, it's not a complete collection of everything John Howe has done, but the book does claim that it collects all of his Tolkien-related works. However, there are 2 caveats to that. One, that doesn't necessarily mean it contains all of his unpublished or private Tolkien works, and 2, you have to remember that this book was published before the Fellowship of the Ring movie was released, and so doesn't contain any of the concept art he did for the films. But I actually prefer that that's the case. There's also quite a bit of text, although the font is super large. There's some commentary from John himself that gives context to a lot of what you're looking at, as well as his thoughts and ideas, which I liked all of that. I also really liked Peter Jackson's foreword and Alan Lee's afterword. What I liked a little less is that most of the text seems to be contributions from authors whose book covers were painted by John, heaping praise on him, and then also John himself praising other authors whose books he's worked on. And I mean, it's not actually as bad as it sounds. I didn't really mind it. It's just that outside of a foreword, which is the only place for it, I hate people wasting space in books with over-the-top flattery that is of no benefit to the reader. The book has over 200 images, which for a book of this size and art of this type is very good. Very less good is the design, layout, and size of some of the pieces. Overall, the design and layout is very clunky, but only seriously affects maybe 10% of the images, and there's no argument about like page count or the number of images. The space is there, it's simply bad design. Like, look at this. They've spread the bottom image across 2 pages so stuff gets lost in the center, yet look at how much blank space there is to the right. Why wouldn't they just put the whole image on 1 page there? Absolutely mental. Because John Howe's work is so sweeping and epic, the images that are too large aren't really a problem, albeit often unnecessary. Instead, it's the number of artworks that are printed ridiculously small, and it's just weird when the majority of the images are presented really well. Most seem to be around half page, which I think is perfect for what's being displayed, but then it's frustrating when it occasionally gives you 1 image spread across 2 whole pages, and then you turn the page and there's an equally epic and detailed piece that's reproduced at 1/10 of a page. There are a bunch of other little things that make the layout very awkward, but there's not much point getting into that because honestly, none of it is so bad that it should discourage you from getting the book. The few poorly sized images are honestly just a slight annoyance when compared to the fact that the rest of the book's fine and John's work is so amazing that it's more than worth it. However, the reason I really wanted to highlight these layout problems is because there is an alternative you may want to consider. So a few years after Myth and Magic came out, a French book was published called John Howe Art Book, and although for most intents and purposes they are very, very similar books, they are not exactly the same book. The French book has more pages, what appears to be more text, although only in French, but most importantly, the images are sized and laid out a bit better. Still not perfect, because they sometimes go the other extreme and make the images unnecessarily large, but overall a notable improvement. I don't think there was a single instance of a piece being too small in that book. However, because nothing can ever be convenient, there is a trade-off. And the trade-off is that while the vast majority of images overlap between the 2 books, both also contain artworks that the other doesn't. And so there's no clear winner as to which is the better book, it just depends on what's more important to you. Myth and Magic, if you're outside of Europe, is going to be a lot cheaper and easier to get a hold of since it had a larger print run and seems to have maybe a slightly greater quantity of images. Meanwhile, the French John Howe art book has much better presentation of the works. And as for text, obviously if you don't read French, you're going to miss out on that. However, I will say that although the text in Myth and Magic is nice, it's definitely not essential. And in terms of my personal opinion, I got Myth and Magic before I was aware of the French book, but if I had my time again, I would prefer the French one, since when I get an art book, I get it for the art, not the text. Even though good text in an art book is always a really nice bonus, it's not worth the disservice the book is doing to a lot of the artworks. But because there is so much overlap between the two books, I really don't think it's worth getting both unless you are the most uber John Howe fan who wants absolutely everything. But for everyone else, honestly, I wouldn't stress too much about which one to get. Either way, you're going to get a great collection of some really amazing fantasy art, and especially in terms of Middle-earth. However, if you are interested in the French book, to add further complications, in 2019 a French publisher crowdfunded a new edition of John Howe art book with the same cover but with 16 new pages. I haven't actually seen that one, so I don't know how it compares, but it is still available on their website. In terms of other John Howe books, he's done a bunch in addition to the various books he's illustrated and anthologies his work has appeared in. There are a couple of more how-to art theory type books, but I don't know much about those. There's also Lost Worlds, which I'll only mention here since I will do a full review on that. There's also another French art book called Sur la Terre de Tolkien, which I haven't had a chance to look through, but it seems like it might be more of an exhibition catalogue with lots of blank space and way too large images. And then lastly, there is A Middle-earth Traveller, which is a beautiful little book focused solely on The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And thankfully, you don't need to worry about how this book compares to the other art books. It contains a little bit of the Middle-earth art already featured in his other art books, but the majority seems to be concept art he did for the films, which Myth and Magic has none of, so it's definitely different enough that you can get both books without feeling like you've paid for the same thing twice. It's got too much black and white sketch stuff for my taste, but if you like that sort of thing, definitely check that out, along with my Lord of the Rings / Hobbit playlist, which has tons of other movie related books featuring John's work.